Poetryburst video covers Bayonet Charge by Ted Hughes. First, let us read the poem. Bayonet Charge. Suddenly he awoke and was running, raw in raw-seamed hot khaki, his sweat heavy, stumbling across a field of clods towards a green hedge that dazzled with rifle fire, hearing bullets smacking the belly out of the air. He lugged a rifle, numb as a smashed arm, the patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eyes sweating like molten iron from the centre of his chest. In bewilderment then, he almost stopped. In what cold clockwork of the stars and nations was he the hand pointing that second? He was running like a man who has jumped up in the dark and runs, listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running, and his foot hung like statuary in mid-stride. Then the shot-slashed furrows threw up a yellow hair that rolled like a flame and crawled in a threshing circle, its mouth wide open, silent, its eyes standing out. He plunged past with his bayonet towards the green hedge. King, honour, human dignity, etc. dropped like luxuries in a yelling alarm to get out of that blue crackling air, his terrors touchy dynamite. The poem explores a bayonet charge. Bayonets are small blades mounted on the end of a rifle for close quarters work. The poem is set in World War I. The soldier leaves his trench, we assume, and is running towards the enemy. The enemy aren't referenced apart from the reference to the green hedge, which might suggest a wall of soldiers or might be a literal hedge. Either way, it's a significantly dangerous situation. The soldier appears to be on his own, and throughout the poem the repetition of the verb run or running helps to give an uncontrolled and slightly chaotic feel to the man's charge. The poem explores the power of a single person. It explores political power and oppression, particularly in the way that the commanders of the army feel about their soldiers. The poem has at its heart the horror of war. The charge itself is a metaphor for the chaos and damage that war inflicts on people. The final lines seem to suggest that human beings are transformed into nothing but weapons by war. He becomes dynamite. However, this seems to be as dangerous to society as a whole as it is to the enemy. The poem also draws on Hughes' family experience of war, but also on his love of the natural world and a strong sense of the order of the universe. War, in this poem, is seen as a threat to both people and the natural world. Let's look at our first quotation. Suddenly he awoke and was running, raw in raw-seamed hot khaki. Here we have a reference to the shock of waking and moving or leaving the trench, and we also have a reference to his uniform, the idea that the edges of his khaki uniform are not holding together very well. But the adjective raw is repeated twice, which is interesting and worth returning to. If we break that quotation down, we will see that we have the adverb suddenly, and then the pronoun he, which is all the information we get about the soldier through the whole poem. We get the verb awoke, and then the adjectives raw and raw-seamed hot khaki form a metaphor about the soldier himself. The adverb suddenly emphasises the shock of war. The verb awoke may imply he's been sleeping in the open, or that he suddenly realised the danger he's in. He has metaphorically awoken to his situation. The adjective raw reminds the reader of wounds and pain. The metaphor of the raw-seamed uniform almost implies that he's falling apart under the pressure of war. The use of the pronoun he throughout makes him less of an individual. He is denied importance. The panicked brutality of the rhythm plus the in media res opening emphasises the shock of the soldier. We are thrown into this poem as a reader, and we have to run through it with him, metaphorically. Our second quotation. In what cold clockwork of the stars and the nations was he the hand pointing that second? Here, the soldier and the army are compared to clockwork or parts of a clock. It's described as cold, and then he specifically is referred to as the hand of the clock. To break that quotation down further, we have cold clockwork, which is an adjective and a noun pairing to form a metaphor. We also have the nouns stars, nations and hand, and the pronoun he. The noun clockwork implies the army treats all the soldiers like cogs. They're the pieces of something important, like the bits of a clock that make it work, but each one is not individually important. Instead, they are dehumanized and part of the machine. The adjective cold emphasizes the uncaring nature of commanders of the army. The question highlights the futility of war, but also the indifference of the commanders. There is no point questioning, the writer implies, because everything is set and unchangeable. It will continue to move like a clock once it's wound up and set. The soldier is reduced to a hand. The metaphor suggests he's no longer a person, but only a victim. The metaphor of the stars evokes a sense of big, empty skies above them. The traditional idea of a god overseeing the lives of people and caring about them is absent. It doesn't appear in this poem. Instead, they are watched by faceless and uncaring stars. Symbolically, their own fate is not in their hands. This entire quotation is juxtaposed to chaos of the charge itself. The soldier is permanently trapped between a system, the clockwork, and a chaotic and futile reality, the charge, both of which are actively harming him. For the soldier, the writer implies, there is no way out. A bonus quotation. If you need to talk about the power of nature and you're comparing this poem to something that's strong on the natural world, like Storm on the Island, then you might perhaps use this quotation. A yellow hare, its mouth wide open silent. Or you might add blue crackling air in. Both contain metaphors. Mouth is a noun, as is air, and silent is an adjective. This poem also represents the damage that war does to nature. The noun mouth makes it seem as if the hare is protesting at the way war treats the natural world. It's panicked. It's almost trying to yell a warning that we're not getting things right. However, the adjective silent undercuts that protest. Like everything else in the poem, it has no power. The air itself is like a weapon. It has been corrupted and is blue. This literally refers to the smoke from the weapons around the soldier, but also seems to suggest poison and corruption. Throughout the poem, there's an ongoing corruption of the natural world. Mankind has corrupted the heavens, when it references the stars, the air, the ground, which is torn into shot-slashed furrows, and the wildlife, leaving nothing, not even ourselves, untouched. Our final quotation, the final line of the poem, his terrors touchy dynamite. Here we see the soldier compared to dynamite. We see his fear specifically compared to a weapon that's designed to explode at any moment. We have the noun, dynamite, paired with the adjective touchy. The noun terror helps us to form a metaphor of the whole thing. The metaphor implies that the man has become a weapon. He is frightened, so he kills. The metaphor implies he's not a controlled killer. Like dynamite, he could explode and kill anyone. The metaphor implies his feelings are destroying him. The focus of the sentence is on his terror. The writer has reduced the soldier to a pronoun only, so he no longer matters to the scene. The adjective touchy implies the hair-trigger sensitivity that's a result of his trauma. The experience of war is presented as a brutal dehumanisation.